In this video, I want to explore the great work of our culture, the great work of our time as I see it. And it's actually a journey through human evolution following the history of the brain. And so in the evolutionary paradigm, we began as reptiles, and slowly we moved through the reptilian period into the more mammalian period, and finally into what we kind of know as the human animal, the human being. And there's the beginnings, there's the potential within the brain in the hypothalamus, in the frontal lobes, to becoming the spiritual human being. And the story of this is actually in the current day reflected in the story of trauma. And so we have infants being born with all of the potential to be, like any of us, profoundly spiritual, profoundly embodied deities, to really express what it is to be all loving, all knowing, all doing. We have the potential to be deities, and we also have the potential to be demons, to be monsters. And so much of that pivots on environment and trauma within the environment. Now, here's why. So you and I, let's say we're interacting at the level of human beings, are interacting with our frontal lobes. We're interacting with our right and left hemispheres to varying degrees. Our culture dramatically overemphasizes the logical linear hemisphere and actually shames and denigrates the more intuitive feminine hemisphere in the brain, that more image-based, that more spontaneous and intuitive aspect of the brain. We're interacting here as, hopefully, human beings. But if someone walks in and puts a gun to my head, what happens is the human parts of the brain and many of the animal parts of the brain shut down, in many cases. And I regress down to the lizard brain, down to the instinctual brain. Now, this is significant because in the instinctual brain, there is only three impulses. They are the traumatic impulses of fight, flight, and freeze. And the chemicals produced by my brain, produced by my body, will be designed to do one, two, or all three of those things simultaneously or in sequence. Now, here's the interesting thing with trauma. If it does not get repaired, if a hug, if a loving exchange does not allow the trauma to be repaired, the fight, flight, freeze impulse, the fight, flight, freeze chemicals stay locked in the body, loudly broadcasting in a way that overshadows the more evolved parts of the body and the brain. Now, here's some other interesting things about the lizard brain, about fight, flight, and freeze, about PTSD trauma, the traumatic response. It cuts down empathy. In other words, the sociopathic state that every single human being is capable of. You, me, everyone can be reduced to a sociopathic state. There are no sociopaths. There are human beings that are trapped all the time, sometimes, from time to time, in a sociopathic state. Trapped by what? By trauma. Now, this is very important to understand because in our cultural understanding of freedom, it's very much focused on the individual. But remember that if someone comes up and puts a gun to my head, this is not a personal choice on my part. Meaning, there's never going to be a questionnaire that I fill out that says, would you like someone to randomly come up and stick a gun to your head and threaten or kill you, yes or no, and where I'm going to say, seems like a great idea. There's never going to be a time where I answer, yes, I would like that to happen on the questionnaire. In other words, the fact that it's happening, the fact that someone is getting traumatized in this world means that they are out of control in their environment, means that they have been unable to navigate within an environment and avoid that trauma. Now, this gets tricky with abuse and trauma survivors that reenact the abuse. And a lot of why that happens is that in an emotionally illiterate culture, we have abusers, mostly parents, who hurt their children, and because they can't stomach the truth of saying, I'm so sorry, I don't know what's gotten into me, I don't have control over my own impulses around you, my child. I'm as helpless as you are around this. Because they can't stomach that reality. It's one of the paralyzing aspects of trauma and reenacting one's abuse, becoming the abuser. Something that happens when the abuse goes in very deep and is not healed, the abused becomes the abuser. This is very important to understand, by the way, because there is no abuser out there that was born an abuser. There's no abuser out there that was born an abuser. There's no abuser out there that said, I could be free of all abuse and just go on living a wonderful life, but I think I would like to abuse other people. That's more fun than being loved or being loving or having a great life. It's more fun to hurt other people and and do this and that and the other than it is to be happy and alive. No, that doesn't happen. What happens is that a child is abused, and usually they try and speak up. I don't want it. Take it away. Stop sticking that thing in my body. I don't want this. I don't want this. And they are hurt, and they're hit, and they're shamed for their healthy outbursts. No, you shut up. You know what? It's going to be worse. I'll kill you if you don't go along with this. So they get the message. They get the message to shut up. Secondly, they get this over and over again. Maybe they turn to their mother. Maybe they turn to this. And because we're so scared of abuse, and we're so scared of abusers in this culture, we're scared of our own traumas. Many of us can identify with it. The abused child gets the message that there's something wrong with them for bringing it up. In other words, that what is most healthy in them, the defense and the, hey, this is not right, there's something wrong with that. And this hurts terribly, but a part of them, in order to survive, turns inward and start shaming themselves. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. Now, at a certain point, if someone else isn't abused, this is one of the reasons that profound innocence is often targeted by abusers. When someone else is not abused, is not feeling terrible, and you're carrying abuse, and then you're abusing yourself because you don't want to be attacked by your environment. It's a survival technique. What happens is you become complicit in the internal abuse, but at the same time profoundly envious of people who are free with it. That person's happy. That person doesn't know what it's like to have to lie and pretend that this is fun so that the abuser can feel good about themselves. That person doesn't know what it's like to be betrayed and have to suck it up and say, no, I was stupid, I lied. I lied when I talked about that abuse. It's really my fault, da 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 da. That person doesn't know that. And so they have something I'm never going to have: freedom, dignity, safety, truth. And there's profound envy. I wanted that my whole life. I'm probably never going to get it. Because once the traumatic cycle goes into place where we associate life and death with challenging the abuser, something that was true as a child, we actually fight the abuse coming to light. We fight it in ourselves. We feel paralyzed with fear when it comes to challenging our abuser. And so what's left is to try and make sense of why we're abused. And it's always a shaming, and it's my fault. Now, when an abused person cannot get out of this hell and is punished on all sides for trying, that you shouldn't be so negative, you should have let this go a long time ago, all of these ignorant statements that our culture is rife with in its complicit conspiracy to not talk about abuse and to, in effect, protect the abuser. When that happens, the abuse survivor often turns negative and they pull down the next person. And they do the same thing, and then the culture comes in and protects them. They know the whole pattern, and it gives a sense of significance. And it answers this thing like, why are you so better than me? Why do you get to have a loving, happy life and I don't? So this is kind of the source of envy. But my point is, in this, no abuser who has the choice to live a beautiful life of loving and being loved with dignity, who has that choice, chooses to abuse. When the cycle completes itself, as it generally does in intergenerational abuse, when the cycle completes itself and the abused child becomes the abuser, it is evidence, not of something fatally flawed in humanity, not of evidence of something fatally flawed in that human being. It is evidence that they could not escape the abuse pattern without dealing with more trauma, without reactivating. See, because when the abuser delivers the abuse with the message that their life and safety is in danger if they talk about the abuse, the child will always become complicit in the secret, in the silence. Because the child is dependent on the abuser, whether that is a government, whether that is a school system, whether that is a parent, whether that is a minister. The child is dependent on the goodwill and love of the abuser. And the contract usually reads something like, you shut up, you get abused, you don't call it abuse, you pretend that this is okay, and you make me look good, and I won't hurt you as much. I'll let you live. I won't terrorize you. I won't kill your family, whatever it is. And so the child goes along with it. Now, these are the people who maybe they build up enough courage at some point, years later, to tell someone, and then they get humiliated. Or they tell someone ignorant who says, well, why didn't you go to so-and-so? Like the most obvious thing in the world. It's complete ignorance that shames the abuse survivor. It shames the abuse survivor because how can they possibly explain to someone who doesn't know the biology of trauma, who doesn't know the biology and the nature of abuse, etc., how can they possibly explain how they become complicit in the abuse, which then leads to attention, either a backlash towards the friend, towards the support person. Don't you get it? You can't do it. You're ignorant in this area, which can damage the relationship, or it leads to further internalizing the abuse. This is so important to understand because in our culture, in our species work, in our great work, what we are doing is a journey from the reptilian instinctual brain, which any sociopath can do very well. It's fight, flight, freeze, strategize with no regard for empathy and emotion, no regard for feelings, no regard for anyone else's feelings. And this is what brings out the worst in our culture. This is what leads to a new generation of abusers. So sociopaths, or human beings in a sociopathic state, are among the most competent people at survival on the planet, often much more than sensitive empaths. It's just someone in a sociopathic state will virally spread the sociopathic state. When you have interaction with someone in a sociopathic state, you realize that your feelings don't matter. You realize that there's no attunement, and that the only way to survive is to enter the sociopathic state and outmaneuver the sociopath. Otherwise, you're dead, or you're used, or you're confused, or you're insane, or you're broke, or whatever it is. You're in pain, basically. Now, we have trauma emphasized and symbolized, I guess, by the sociopathic state as a symptom. Then we have the fear of trauma. That's when trauma didn't get dealt with very well. When we've had enough of it, we know another one's coming. We have trauma, we have the fear of trauma. We're not in human state in either of these. Then we have hope. We have a sense of possibility that we really could be free of trauma and the fear of trauma. This is when we start to dream and start to grow, etc. And there's hope that this could be possible. And then way up there, where I think current scientists locate DMT in the hypothalamus. You have the DMT state, the state of transcendence, the state in which, when we're in that brain, we know without a shadow of a doubt that we are intricately and intimately connected to all things. And we have transcendence, a transcendence of our body, a transcendence of our human limitations, a transcendence of our ego shame, transcendence of our trauma. And we unleash a probability field that is so vast, so beautiful, that we cannot currently begin to imagine what it is, because where we are in our current culture is we're in trauma, we're in fear of trauma, and then some of us are in hope, and then a few of us go into that state of transcendence, less than 1% of the time. And then a very, 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 very few people, stay in that state of transcendence, 5, 10% of the time, etc. Now, the world we can create, like, for example, the materialist, rationalist, reductionist, capitalist paradigm of enlightened self-interest and self-centeredness, can be facilitated with trauma and the fear of trauma, pain, the threat of pain, etc. You better do this or you'll go in jail, and this and that and the other. And there's a lot that can be done in that terrain. There's certainly, we've seen the whole technological revolution, just catapulting technology thousands of percent forward. But we don't see a change in our human relationships. In many cases, you could measure a human relationship 2,000 years ago. In fact, you could measure a relationship between two monkeys, and you could find less disease in those two monkeys, mentally, emotionally, and physically, than you can in many human beings. Those two monkeys aren't tying each other up, doing this, that, and the other, shaming each other, and this, doing this, and that, and the other. Many human beings are. 2,000 years ago, there isn't the stress and shame and addiction to gadgetry and this and that and the other, and the weird betrayals and this, and like 2,000 years ago, you're just a shepherd and you helped each other out, and weren't addicted to media and weren't busy with politics. You were just living your life. You could say that human relationships in some ways have gone backwards, but they certainly haven't catapulted forward thousands of percent the way our technology has. And that's because we're in trauma and the fear of trauma. That doesn't begin to transcend until we create an environment that does not traumatize the child. When we have an environment that does not traumatize or shame the child, we have an environment that is leading towards hope and transcendence. Thanks for watching.